Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. This is episode number 219, which means that you can find all the relevant links and show notes over at tashcorbin.com/219. This is a very special episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast because this is our first episode in our twice weekly podcast now coming at you. So that's right, the Heart-Centered Business Podcast is now a twice weekly podcast. And in the second podcast of each week, we are going to be alternating between Q&As from questions that you have submitted in and Spotlight series episodes where we put another entrepreneur in the spotlight with a special interview. So today we have a special Q&A episode for you, and I have a fabulous question from Anita Bronwyn-Toy, and her question is in relation to social media for introverts. So if you would like some tips on how to navigate social media, even if you are very introverted and you might find it a little bit draining, then this is going to be a great episode for you. So let's jump in. I'm Tash Corbin, and this is the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. So our question comes from the fabulous Anita Bronwyn-Toy, and you can find her at anitabronwyntoy.com, and her Instagram handle is at Anita Bronwyn-Toy. We will link to those in the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/219. And Anita asks, "Hi Tash, I'm an avid listener to your podcast, but I don't enjoy hanging out in big groups on Facebook. I have no desire to have my own Facebook group either, yet I know both are proven ways to grow and connect with your audience. The thing is, I prefer one-on-one connections and small groups. I don't feel like it's a fear of being visible. It's simply knowing that interacting in large groups, whether in person or online, drains me more than it energizes. I also prefer to limit my time on social media in general, as I find I'm much happier and calmer that way. Do you have any suggestions for sensitive introverts like me who want to share their gifts and reach the right people, but in a way that feels aligned and supportive?" Thank you. And to you, Anita, I will say a big thank you as well, because this is a very common question that I get asked. So much so that I actually already have another podcast episode in which I specifically talk about growing a business and social media for introverts versus extroverts. It's episode number 210. So you'll be able to go along and listen to that previous episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast as well. But for today's Q&A episode, I thought what I would do is just give you 5 little things that you might be able to work with to help you decide what your best strategy is moving forward and how to navigate social media, even if you don't love being in large groups or facilitating large groups. So first and foremost, the question that I would ask is, what part of that process actually drains you? Because engaging in Facebook groups and large Facebook groups on social media has lots and lots of different components. There is the energy of being in a group for hours and hours on end each day. And of course, you're going to find that quite draining if you're just sitting in that energy of a lot of people. But there are lots of different parts about being in a Facebook community. And I know for myself, even facilitating the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs Facebook group with 34,000 people, these days, I spend about 15 to 20 minutes a day in the group, and that's it. And the activities that I am doing in that community are commenting on people's posts and cheering them on. That's a one-to-one interaction with individuals, and sharing my post for the community. And so for me, that is actually not necessarily needing to hold space for 34,000 people and needing to be in the energy of 34,000 people at one time. So really focus in on what is it about being in the groups that's specifically draining you. And you might find that the reason you find being in large groups particularly draining is because you think that there are certain things you need to do to be successful in those groups, and that's actually not true. That's not the actions that you need to be in there doing. The other thing is with starting your own Facebook community, I don't do the administration of my Facebook group anymore. I have a team to do that for me. So it may be that holding off on having a Facebook group until you've got the capacity to have a team helping you with it is the right step for you. I know lots of people who facilitate large groups as very highly sensitive people and introverts, and they use a combination of having really strong boundaries, using limited time in those communities and also having team members to help them navigate that. So I would say that every single marketing strategy and every single option for social media has pieces that favor introverts versus pieces that favor extroverts. And so just get really clear on what piece of it is that drains you and how you may be able to not do that part, find the strategies that work for you and that you don't find particularly draining, or potentially even outsource parts of that strategy as well. Now, that being said, question number 2 is, if I paid you $10,000 to spend 30 minutes in a Facebook group each day, $10,000 a day for 30 minutes of your time, would you still find that activity draining? Now, the reason why I ask this question is that when we get down to brass tacks, when it comes to any social media strategy, it can be very easy to say that it's the strategy that drains you. But for a lot of people, it's the strategy and continuously feeling like the strategy isn't working that actually drains you. So it's a little bit of a tough love kind of question, but I think it's an important one. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I was just like, the internet doesn't work for introverts, so just run away and don't worry about it. Because there is so much opportunity that is available to us with social media and the free platforms that are available to us. And for a lot of people, the reason why it's draining is because it's not working. And if it was working, you would actually be energized by that. And therefore, you wouldn't be linking it to introversion versus extroversion. Let's not forget, the internet was created by introverts for introverts. I don't know anything more introverted than being able to sit on your own, in your own home, with your own energy, your own boundaries, with complete control over when you show up and when you don't show up, with complete control over who you see posts from versus who you don't see posts from. I really find it interesting that so many introverts find social media draining or find online business draining when, if we're really honest, it's one of the group experiences in which you have the most control over your boundaries and whose energy you let in and how much time you invest in that particular experience. So the question of, if I paid you $10,000 a day to do 30 minutes of it, would you find it draining, is a real valid question, because if you were making great money from this strategy and it was working really easily for you, I would challenge that perhaps you wouldn't find it so draining. So the question then is, how do you make it work, and how do you make it work in the strategies that really feel like they're aligned for you, instead of just saying being on Facebook or being in Facebook groups doesn't work with me because I'm an introvert. So that's number 2. Number 3 is, don't be afraid to invite the party back to your place where you have a little bit more control. So if you don't love being in Facebook communities or you don't love being on social media, why not use strategies like using automated scheduled posts, using other platforms such as Instagram or your page or paid Facebook ads, invite people onto your mailing list and have that as an intimate conversation. For me, there's very little difference between writing an email to my mailing list and writing a post in my Facebook group that goes to largely the same group of people. But I understand for some people, they attach more energetic pressure on being in that group environment. So bring the party back to your place where you do feel like it is a more intimate gathering or it's a more intimate group of people. And then just be really mindful of nurturing that audience. For many people, the reason why they find large-scale strategies so difficult and so draining is not because it's hard to get reach these days, but it's actually because they're so focused on reach and so not focused on nurturing and conversion that in order to get a baseline level of sales that feels sustainable, you have to be active and doing so much and reaching so many people. If you are getting 10 people signing up to your mailing list each week, those 10 people should be treated as though they have walked in to the most glamorous VIP event and should be getting connection with you and an opportunity to really have a conversation with you. If you're an introvert, you're going to totally nail those one-to-one interactions. And yet when I speak to most people about the strategies that they're using on social media and online, the strategies that they're using are these high reach, low touch, low conversion strategies that require them being in a space with hundreds and hundreds of people just to make one sale. When I first started my business, I was in other people's Facebook groups, and there was one group in particular where I was very well known, and I was doing 20 minutes a day in that Facebook group. And in that 20 minutes, I would do my post for the day, and I would look for 3 people whose questions I could answer, and then I'd do a bunch of liking and cheering people on with any time that was left over. And in that time, I was getting 5 or 6 people every single day, either reaching out to me on Messenger or signing up to my mailing list. And I sent a private, personal reply to every single one of those people. Now, what that meant was, with a mailing list of only 150 people, I was still getting 3 to 4 sales conversations every single week. So it's not about needing ginormous reach. It's about being really mindful of how you nurture the relationship you have with the people you are reaching. Bring the party back to your place, be an epic party host, and then you don't need to worry about going and pilfering everyone else's parties. You can have an amazing, nurtured, curated space and have an intimate conversation with people and not need to be in those groups every single day for 5 hours a day. Number 4, and I think this ties all of this together really beautifully, is to build your strategy to your strengths. But don't jump straight to the reason that it's not working for you because you're an introvert if something isn't getting the traction that you were hoping to get. Give it the time and energy that it deserves. Give it the nurturing and tailoring your experience and your strategy on that platform, the time that it takes to get a little bit of traction. And instead of asking, does being in Facebook groups work for me or not work for me? Instead, ask the question, how can I make a Facebook group strategy that really works for my natural strengths, sensitivities, and my introversion? And in that instance, you're going to be able to look for the solution instead of focusing on the problem. And you can build your marketing strategy to your strengths instead of trying to build it to someone else's specifications or suggestions. Number 5, work with an introvert specialist. There are business coaches and strategists out there who specialize in supporting highly sensitive people or introverts with their social media and their online marketing strategy. So if these suggestions and these ideas alone aren't enough for you to feel like you can find a social media or Facebook strategy that really works for you, then I would highly recommend that you work with someone who specializes in working with someone just like you. Most of them have been there themselves and grown their businesses with their introversion and building it to their strengths as an introvert. So don't be afraid to hire the support that you need to create that specialized, unique strategy that's really going to work to your strengths. So hopefully, Anita, that's answered your question. And for all the other beautiful introverts out there, I know it seems really weird, an extrovert giving you advice as an introvert, but I have worked with a range of people over the years, thousands and thousands of women, many of whom, I would say actually the majority of whom are introverts. And we're always able to work a solution that works out to be tailored to the strengths of the individual, because there are parts of every strategy that favor introverts and there are parts of every strategy that favor extroverts. And it's just about creating that unique strategy that really works for you. Now, if you haven't yet checked out my previous podcast episode, Is It Easier for Extroverts? Make sure you go and do that. I'll put the link to that with the show notes of today's episode, plus a link so you can go and check out Anita and her amazing business at tashcorbin.com/219. And if you've got a question that you'd like me to answer here on the Heart Centered Business Podcast, simply go to tashcorbin.com/question. Pop your question in there. Make sure you give me all the details of how we can give you a link back so I can give you a shout out and answer your question here on the podcast. Until next time, thank you so much for listening along, and I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now. Would you like more tips, tools, and resources to help you grow your heart-centered business? Head to tashcorbin.com today.